when the time comes where you got to re-roof your house,
Oh, yeah.
you're going to have to tear off all those solar panels and put them back on after the re-roof is done. And, like I mentioned, brushing off the solar panels can be a challenge. You mentioned the tilt of the panels. So a lot of factors. I don't like roof mounts unless that's the only way that you can get them out of the shade.
The Ready Life. Into the country.
Hi, I'm Lisa Meisner.
And I'm Nick, her husband.
Welcome back to the Ready Life podcast, where you'll learn how to make your home and your family as independent as possible for basic necessities like water, heat, food, and the power that most of us depend on these days. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the important things you have to do when designing your solar power system. A system design is really important because it enables you to get an idea of exactly how many solar panels you need and what size of battery bank you need before you actually set something up.
That's right.
So
there's several factors that affect the size of your solar array, what size it needs to be. Things like your average daily power usage and your solar climate. For instance, are you in Arizona or are you in Seattle or are you somewhere in between those two extremes? But some of these factors you can do something about, like power usage, for instance. You can adjust your power usage if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. But some of them you can't change, such as your solar climate. Well, I guess you could, but you'd have to move. So there's not much that you can do to change the climate. And some of these factors are a mix of those two. And our topic for this week is kind of a mix, and it's shade. So we've looked at system design in previous episodes, but this particular episode, we're going to focus in on one aspect of that, and that's the shade dimension. Sometimes you can improve your shade situation by cutting down some trees or moving a solar array to a different location, or I say moving, I guess I should say choosing one location over another, because where you place the array can certainly have a profound effect on the shade.
And a lot of people don't even think about that. They just think, I'm going to get solar panels and I'm going to put them on my roof. Or I'm going to get solar panels and I think right there would look so nice. Like we just think about the aesthetics of it. You pulling up the driveway and there's a little house and then there's the solar array. But really, there's a lot more that goes into where you place your solar panels than just, I think this would be a great spot.
Right. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about too. But anyhow, so what we're going to do is try and help you to understand the process of how you know what your shade situation is. Because I'll tell you, so many times when I've been working with folks that I'd ask them about their shade and they're like, I don't have, we're really good. No shade, no shade. And then when the truth comes out, I say the truth, they weren't lying. They honestly thought
they didn't have any
shade. But when we actually looked at the shade situation and measured it, they actually did have a decent amount of shade, sometimes quite a bit of it. But my observation is that folks are typically overly optimistic about their shade situation.
Yes.
And so that's where a shade analysis comes in. It sounds technical, I know, but we've worked over the years to make it something that's feasible for an ordinary person to do with minimal equipment. And we actually have a Accelerator coming up in the Ready Life Academy starting next week. We're going to be walking members through this process of designing your own off-grid solar system step by step. And part of that process is doing a shade analysis. So we thought in this podcast, we'd just walk you through our process of how we're going to be teaching the Ready Life Academy members to do a shade analysis, since that will be one of the weeks in the Accelerator that we spend on that.
That's right.
And what you'll come out of a shade analysis knowing is how many peak hours of sunshine you would have on a sunny day in any month of the year, which is really cool because once we've done this, we could be doing the shade analysis in July, and I can predict with a reasonable amount of accuracy how many peak hours of solar power we would get in December, for instance, or in March, or what have you, on a sunny day. So it's really, really useful and is an important part of the design process. And by the way, it's also super helpful for choosing your location.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that because, I remember at one point, we thought here would be the perfect location for the solar array. And then when we did the shade analysis for that spot, we were really surprised that if we just moved over a little bit farther or, adjusted our position a little bit, we might even get better solar exposure. So, doing a shade analysis really can have an impact on your design and how many solar panels you're going to end up needing in the end.
Right. And it's helpful to do more than one, to do it. If you're at all uncertain about where to put them, then try it out. Do it in one location and in another and compare the two.
That's right.
So
first, the first question I have to ask is why is talking about shade on solar panels so important? If a little shade hits just a small corner of a solar panel, does it really make that big of a difference?
Well, it can. You'd be surprised how much of an impact even a little bit of shade can have, and especially if a significant portion of the array is in shade, it can have an impact on the whole array and pull down the amount of power that it's able to produce. Now, some panels are able to deal with partial shade better than others, but any of them are going to be impacted by shade. And
of course, if you have your solar panel partly in shade and then you're not producing as much power, right? So then you're going to need to have more solar panels.
More expensive.
Yeah, which means more of an expense.
Right.
So
next, there are a few things that we should talk about regarding where to place your solar panels, because where you place them can have a pretty dramatic impact.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people just think, we'll put the solar panels up on the roof because that just, doesn't everyone put their solar panels on the roof?
Most people do, but there's some major drawbacks that I personally don't like putting them on the roof if at all possible. That's kind of like my last resort. If that's the only way that you can get out of the shade, then, yes, it can work. But for instance, you might not have a south-facing roof line. So that if your solar array, ideally for maximum production, you want them to be facing due south. And for year-round, average total amount of solar production, that's typically going to be the best. And if your roof is shifted a significant way, one direction, one way or the other, you're not going to be getting the maximum amount of power that your array could produce, which means bigger array, more expense, all of that to produce the same amount of power. Another factor, snow is likely going to build up on a roof-mounted array in northern climates where you get a decent amount of snow, and that for a couple of reasons. One is just the nature of the roof. When you've got panels laying on top of a well-insulated roof, the snow is going to pile up around them, and it's just going to build on each other and end up covering them up potentially. Also, the pitch of your roof is often not going to be super steep, which means the snow isn't going to shed on its own, and so it's going to be dependent upon sun melting the snow off. And with our ground-mounted array, we're able to tip our panels steep enough where it actually where the array will shed the snow most of the time. There's actually not that many times that I have to go out and brush the solar panels off. I do have a extension pole with a push broom on the end of it that I use to brush them off if there's a weird kind of snow where it's like really wet and then it freezes up and coats them with ice or something, then yes, you got to do it then, but not too many times. So that's another factor.
I was just thinking too, when you were talking about like the tilt of the solar panels, being able to shed the snow better. If you have your panels on the roof, I know for us, we go out and we adjust our panels, twice a year, once in the spring and then once in the fall. And that's just because the sun, obviously, since we're in a northern climate, in the summer, the sun is higher in the sky, whereas in the winter, the sun is like lower in the horizon. So with the solar panels, if the sun's coming from, a lower direction, we want them more upright, which then means they're going to shed snow better. But if it's during the summertime, we're going to want to adjust the tilt back. But if you have your panels on the roof, I'm just thinking that's going to be a lot of fun to try and get up there and loosen a bunch of screws and try and adjust the panels.
With roof
you just
mounts,
have to leave it.
You can't do that. Yeah, they're made to be stationary. So that's a major drawback there. Also, there's more penetrations in your roof, so more potential for leaks. And another factor, when the time comes where you got to re-roof your house,
oh yeah,
you're going to have to tear off all those solar panels and put them back on after the re-roof is done. And, like I mentioned, brushing off the solar panels can be a challenge. And you mentioned the tilt of the panels. So a lot of factors. I don't like roof mounts unless that's the only way that you can get them out of the shade.
Yeah, and I have to mention, like, adjusting our solar panels is so easy. There's literally a little handle out there, and you just crank it like this. I can crank it like do, and then it just adjusts the tilt. It's so nice.
Right. It's awesome. So it is a little more expensive, though. The cheapest mounting is a roof mount because the roof is already there, so you're just attaching them to the roof. So it is more of an investment there, but we've found it to be well worth it. We're really glad for that investment that we made in a ground mount.
Yes. So, pay once, cry once.
Or buy once, cry once.
Buy once, cry. Thank you. See?
So another factor is north end of a clearing. And you were referring to this earlier, that folks will sometimes place their array just anywhere for no logical reason. I remember the other day, it came home to me. We were driving past a neighbor's house, and you could just barely see down their driveway a little bit and see the solar array. And I remember, for whatever reason, it hadn't hit me before where they had placed their solar array. And it was right in the middle of their clearing, because their property is heavily forested. So they had this clearing where the house is built, small clearing, and right in the middle of the clearing is the solar array. And I said, why didn't they put that on the north end of their clearing? Because they could have. There was plenty of space there, but I think somebody just wasn't thinking about it. And the north end of your clearing is going to give you the maximum amount of sun, because remember, in the wintertime, the sun is lower in the southern horizon. This effect is especially profound in northern climates, but anywhere north of the equator, the sun is going to dip a certain amount to the south in the wintertime. And so any obstructions that you have to the south, you want to get as far away from them as you can. And that means getting on the north end of a clearing.
That's right, because it makes them appear lower in the horizon the further away you get from them.
Right, and gets you away from the shade of those trees to your south. So unless there's some other extenuating factors that are unique to your situation, you're typically going to want to be on the north end of a clearing.
Yes, so get away from the shade.
That's right. So how do we do a shade analysis?
This is the fun part. We get into the tools.
That's right. So basically what we're doing is we're making a map of our southern horizon. Just think of a piece of paper, and I'll be showing you this piece of paper in a little bit, but we've got a piece of paper up, and I'm looking to the south, and I'm basically going to be mapping out my obstructions that are to the south on this piece of paper. And that's the theory, gives you a general idea of what we're doing. So, but you first need to know where south is. And what's the
like some of us who can't just be like, oh, south is that way.
That's right. So what's the first instrument that comes to mind?
So the first instrument you need is a compass, right? So you know which direction is actually south. Like I seem to think south is actually more that way, but south is on our property more that way.
Yep.
So
here's a compass. This is a nice one. This is my Silva Ranger. And it's nice because it has a declination adjustment. You probably know this, but the North Pole is not actually located. The true North Pole is not in the same location as the magnetic North Pole. And so the needle wants to point obviously to magnetic north. And when we're using maps and things like that, we want to know where true north is. And so it's got a handy declination adjustment. But anyhow, we're just getting a rough idea of south with a compass. And this one also has another interesting feature that is going to be useful in our shade analysis. And that is, I don't know if it's going to be really easy to see here, but there's a legend along the edge of the circle, along the edge of the bezel in the compass for vertical degrees of inclination. And so you can actually you can take your compass and point it at something, and then you can read this little black needle and it'll tell you the degrees of inclination. That's going to be a handy piece of info too, because when we're mapping our southern horizon, we need two pieces of info. We need to get a fix on where the tops of our obstructions are. So we're going to need a horizontal fix, and that's going to be your normal compass bearing, east, west, north, south, a degree bearing that way. Then we also need a vertical fix, and that's going to be the degrees of inclination, how high up.
how high in the sky it is.
And so we're going to do this from the place where the solar array is going to be located. You don't just walk out your front door and do it and call it good. You want to go to the physical location where you're planning to possibly put your array. And that is a really important factor, because you'd be surprised how much of a difference just a short distance can make in things like that. And so, like I said, compass is one way that you could go, but I quickly found after doing some of these that this was the slow way and the challenging way, and it's sometimes hard to get really accurate results with this. So I currently use a app on my phone with a iPhone. My favorite app is called Theodolite, but it basically has a crosshairs on here, and you can point it at your obstruction, and then it's going to tell you the vertical degrees of inclination there, and then the compass bearing there. And the cool thing is you can go along and press this little button, which takes a snapshot of the whole screen, all of the data on the screen. And so when I'm doing a shade analysis, I'll just stand where the array is going to be, and I'll go snap, snap, snap.
Just
snap,
take a picture
snap,
with the crosshairs pointing at the tops of each of the trees,
at the
or
tops
the
of the trees
obstructions.
or mountain or any obstructions that you have to the south, and just snap, 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 snap. And then I can go home and I've got pictures in my picture folder of the entire thing, and I can map it out in the comfort of my home rather than sitting there taking a, looking at it and then jotting it down on the
Writing it
map.
down.
And it makes it a lot easier. So that's a great option, a great tool. It's not that spendy. I forget. I think it's like $5 or something.
Probably more since inflation.
Yeah, who knows? And I was about to say the C word. The C word.
The C word.
Yeah. the
Oh.
2020.
I'm slow today.
Shall I say 2020? The thing that everybody blames everything on.
Yes, there
Yeah.
we go.
Okay, so Theodolite, if you have I believe that only works for iOS, for like an iPhone. So another app I have not used, but Android app is, what was it called? Trying to remember. We'll put it in the link, in the description below.
So if you have an Android, just go look in the description below.
Yeah, sorry. I should have jotted this down, but I don't remember it because I don't use it. But anyhow, that's a great option. Now we've got our coordinates, our vertical and horizontal coordinates for getting a fix on all of our obstructions to the south. Then what are we going to do with that? Well, this is a sun chart. And if you're listening on the audio version on one of the podcast platforms, my apologies. This is one particular episode where it would be really handy to check out our YouTube channel and see the video version, or we do have a video version on Spotify. But anyhow, this is a sun chart that I created, and each blue line on this sun chart represents the arc of the sun through the sky for any given month. Like down here is December, January, November. Up here, the highest is June, and then July, and then May, so on and so forth. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take those coordinates and we're going to plot them across here. And
so this would be the vertical axis, and then this would be the horizontal axis. And so you would just look at these numbers and then figure out where exactly that obstruction was and then put a dot there, right?
So I'm going to look at one of my pictures from theodolite, and it says 25 degrees vertical inclination and 120 degrees horizontal. So I'm going to put a mark there, and then, a mark there and there, whatever my coordinates are on here. And then I'm going to color in, shade everything. I'm going to connect the dots and shade everything below that line. And then you can go along and see what are the unshaded areas. And there's a number on each of these lines between each hour. The red lines represent each hour of the day, and there's a number in between, and that's the percent of potential solar power for each hour. And so you can basically total these up, and if the only thing you had available in March was this, and this, then it'd be 11 plus 13 plus 14, so 27, 37, 38. So you'd have 38% of the potential solar power available to you. And that number is useful for our system design. And so so I'm just describing how we do this and how we're going to be teaching it starting next week in the Accelerator. Folks will have the sun chart and plot their coordinates on there. They'll get these numbers, and then these numbers for each month, there will be a certain percentage. Maybe it'll be 70% for one month and 80% for another month, whatever those numbers are, and they're going to drop them in the calculator that we're going to provide for them as part of the Accelerator, and it will do all of the math and all of that kind of thing.
It'll tell you how many solar panels you're going to need to have in order to make it enough power to power your home and your lifestyle.
Well, this is one of the factors.
That's just one of the factors.
There's also solar climate and a couple other things, your power usage and stuff like that. But that's how we do it. Now, how could you do it if you didn't have this stuff? It becomes a little bit more guesswork.
More math.
So you can find a sun chart. Like I think the government has some sun charts where it doesn't necessarily have the values, but where you can have something to work with and create your shade pattern across here. And then you'd have to kind of estimate, but you got to remember that sun in the middle of the day is worth more than sun in the morning and evening. And so that's where it gets kind of complex. So it's not going to be super accurate, hence why I spent months developing this whole system to make it easy and make it accurate. And then you can crunch the numbers on your own. I used to do it that way. So I'm not trying to say that you have to have the calculator in order to do it. I designed more than one system with a piece of paper.
And lots of numbers.
And a calculator. So it can be done. I felt like I was going cross-eyed, and that's why I spent months developing this, because I was doing a lot of system designs and it's getting to be challenging.
Helping a lot of folks.
But that is, I hope that gives you a quick overview of the process, how it works, and what you're trying to accomplish. And like I said earlier, most folks lean towards being overly optimistic. So don't just look at this and say, oh, that's a little bit too much work. I think, I'm looking out there to the south and it looks pretty good.
Open to me.
Yeah, it looks pretty. Please don't do that. You would be amazed the profound impact that that can be had on your system by not taking the shade into account. It's going to result in you putting up too small of a solar array, but you won't know until you buy it all, have it all installed and use it. And then you're saying, why am I having to run the generator all the time or this or that, things like this.
Yep.
So it's worth it to take just a little bit of time up front and count the cost. Isn't that a parable?
That's right. That is a parable.
Jesus taught about counting the cost ahead of time and knowing what you're getting into.
And the cool part is when you do a shade analysis, you can look at it and be like, these trees are so beautiful here in this section or over here. But when we did our shade analysis for our property before we installed our solar array here, we did the shade analysis. And what do you know? We had to take out, I think, 7 trees that were just right here. They were in a bad place anyway, and they were a fire hazard, and there were other reasons why they needed to go too. So it wasn't just the shade. There were 3 large cedars that we left right in the middle, unfortunately, that does shade our solar array.
We just couldn't part with them. But they were so gorgeous,
and we decided that it was worth it to leave the trees and just build a slightly larger array so that way we could compensate for the beautiful cedars. So, but that doing a shade analysis gives you that ability to be like, okay, if we took out those 3 trees, we could eliminate 2 solar panels, or I don't know, I'm pulling a number out of a hat, but you get the idea.
Right.
A shade analysis really does make a big difference. So, and then you know what you're going into. You're not just going into it blind.
Right. And it gives you the confidence that this system that you're buying is actually going to work for you, rather than you spend X amount on this system and you don't know. Maybe you're going to have to then come back and double the size of your solar, or who knows?
Yes.
And you didn't budget for that. So it just enables you to count the cost ahead of time so you know what you're getting into, and you end up with a system that just plain works. And so it's worth it, friends. Believe me, I have helped way too many people who didn't count the cost and ended up with issues later on. This is the common denominator. If I had to take all the folks that I've worked, because I usually hear from the folks that are having trouble. I don't usually hear from the folks that are having a great experience, because they're just cruising for years without any issue. But the folks that are having trouble, if I had to pick one common denominator among all of them, by far the most common would be that they didn't do a system design. And so they don't know how much power they need, how much power they're able to produce. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a shot in the dark. So please don't make that mistake. Count the cost ahead of time. Yes, invest a little bit of work or time or money or whatever to do it right ahead of time, and you'll be so glad you did. When we do things the right way, the quality way, we never regret it.
Never a single time. So join us in our solar system design accelerator that we're starting in just about a week, I believe.
Right, next week.
Next week, we're starting this accelerator, and we're going to basically hold your hand and walk you through this whole system design process. It's not as complicated as it might sound. I mean, I'm not the most technical person, but I can do a system design. That's how easy it is.
You've done it a number of times.
I've done, actually,
for friends.
For friends, I've done a number of system designs for them. And so this is something that is very easy to do, and we're going to help you do that in this accelerator starting next week. So please come join the Ready Life Academy. You can find it by going to thereadylife.com/academy and then register there and come join us for this accelerator.
That's right. And so we thank you for joining and hope this has been super helpful to you, keep you out of a lot of trouble, help you to have a really good experience, and hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks for joining.
Bye now.